The recording is on, right? Just to confirm, Alex.
Yes. Please
okay, excellent. So Heather and Yongyi, if you're ready, then we can start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy New Year and welcome to this first Global Network webinar of 2023. My name is Panya Yu and I will be moderating this webinar together with my colleagues Alexander Loschke and Sean Lowell. This webinar is organized by the Global Network of Data Officers and Statisticians. We are a professional network of now just over 2,700 statisticians, data officers, data scientists, and geospatial information experts. We use our online group hosted on Yammer to collaborate, provide technical support, and share knowledge in various areas of data and statistics. If you're not a member already, let me invite you to join us at yammer.com/unstats. Today, we are delighted to have with us our colleagues Yongyi Min and Heather Page from the SDG monitoring section of the UN Statistics Division. Yongyi and Heather will be presenting on preparing evidence-based voluntary national reviews, or VNRs for short. Data are being widely recognized as strategic assets in accelerating the implementation of the SDGs. Data and statistics are therefore a vital element of voluntary national reviews and SDG reporting to accurately demonstrate commitment and progress towards the SDG. VNRs presented by countries at the high-level political forum in July are meant to support governments in reviewing the implementation of the global goals through the opportunities to share experiences among member states. Several resources have already been developed to support member states in different aspects of the VNRs, and UNSD has also developed a guide to serve as a complementary resource for member states on how to use data and statistics to support evidence-based VNRs. The practical guide to evidence-based voluntary national reviews take a roadmap approach and good practices example to suggest key stages in the national VNR process that can enhance the use of data. The publication provides recommendations for what should be reported, how to compile and present statistics, and what information to include in these reviews. In this webinar, Yongyi and Heather will present the guide and data roadmap, as well as additional resources for developing evidence-based VNRs. So let me now introduce our two speakers. Yongyi Min is the Chief of SDG Monitoring Section at the UN Statistics Division. She is responsible for the program of the global monitoring of the progress towards the SDG. She manages the work on the development and implementation of the global SDG indicator framework and supports the work of the interagency and expert group on SDG indicators. Yongyi is the lead author of the annual Global Sustainable Development Goals report and manages other SDGs monitoring outputs at the global level. Heather Page is a statistician also with the SDG monitoring section at UNSD. Before joining UNSD, she was an environmental affairs officer with the Sustainable Development and Natural Resources section of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, before we proceed, just some quick housekeeping reminders. Yongyi and Heather will have 35 to 40 minutes to present. We will then have a Q&A session following their presentation. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to write your comments and questions into the chat box at any time. And then at the end, during the Q&A session, you can ask questions directly by using the raise hand function in Teams, which we prefer. But if you wish, we could also read out the questions on your behalf. Just let us know. As always, this Global Network webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Global Network. We invite you to continue the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Panya, for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear colleagues. It's our great pleasure to share our recent released practical guides for evidence-based voluntary national review. As Pania mentioned, we would like to also share some additional resources that will be useful for countries that conduct SDG monitoring and also voluntary national review. I will start the presentation and then we'll pass to my colleague Heather Page to take you step by step on the data roadmap for evidence-based voluntary national review. I will start. Next slide, please. So in this webinar, we will share the VNRs and the importance role of data, and then we will give you details on the practical guides for evidence-based VNRs. And we'll also look into how to deepen the data analysis. And we'll touch upon leaving no one behind, and also provide these useful resources for VNRs and next steps. Next slide, please. So as many of you know, one of the critical follow-up and review mechanism for the 2030 agenda is a voluntary national review prepared by member states. These are prepared through a country-led process, facilitate the sharing of experience, both the successes and challenges among member states, with a view towards accelerating the implementation of the 2030 agenda. So far, the vast majority of the member state has conducted at least one of the voluntary national review. In 2023, 41 countries will present their VNRs, with the majority of them, which is 39 of them, presenting for a second time. So meaningful assessment of progress on the SDG should be supported by high-quality data and statistics to ensure that the review is evidence-based. For instance, in the 2020 VNRs, country highlight not only the increasingly important role of data and statistics for evidence-based policymaking, but also document their progress in improving monitoring more of the indicators and cross-cutting issue in the SDG agenda. Data and the statistics are used to present progress made towards achieving the goals and targets, also present challenges encountered, such as the impact of the COVID-19 on the implementation of the SDG. And they also hold public agencies, the private sectors, and other stakeholders accountable for the SDGs commitments. And they help to design data-directed policies and allocated resources. Data can also be used to communicate with the development partners and stakeholders and the general public, and help build trust, improve accountability, and the transparency of government institutions. Since 2016, the inclusion of data and progress assessment in the VNR has improved. The country have strengthened their monitoring framework for SDGs. However, country continues to face challenges in SDG monitoring and using data for the VNRs. So limited data availability, lack of timely and disaggregated data are frequently cited as one of the main challenges in preparing the VNRs. So many countries also face human and financial resources constraints in producing the needed data. So this chart showing the proportion of country incorporate data elements in 2020 to 2022 VNRs, showing the using different data products to present the VNRs by using progress charts, online data portal, statistical annex, and also showing the data availabilities in majority of the countries' VNR reports. Next slide, please. So as the data and statistics are vital elements of the VNR process, so the UN Statistical Division has worked on this practical guide for evidence-based VNR. This guide is a complementary resources for countries on how to use data and statistics on SDGs to support evidence-based policymaking and VNRs. Using a roadmap approach and good practice examples, this guide suggests key stages in the national VNR process that can enhance the use of data for evidence-based VNRs. It explains each step on how to use the data for supporting the preparation of VNR, from data preparation, assessment, and collection to the use of data and post-evaluation. So looking ahead, this process can also help to identify strengths and weaknesses of statistical system and statistical capacity building opportunity. So in last year, October, we released this advanced version, made up public available. And so we also share the webpage of these publications, and the final version will be made available soon. And yeah, next slide, please. So this guide use a roadmap approach with good practical examples, suggesting key stages in the national VNR process that can enhance the use of data for evidence-based VNRs. So a VNR data reporting roadmap should reflect more immediate stages for sourcing reliable data to report indicators and statistics in the VNRs. It has much shorter time frame than national SDG data strategies or national SDG data roadmap for scaling up and improving the use of data for sustainable development planning overall. But this VNR data roadmap is systematic and stage focused and can easily hide. The use of the roadmap concept can also draw attention up. So as you can see, we developed this roadmap from for the bear country of the year from October to July and after July. But this just provides an example of the sequence of steps that a country could undertake, but will likely not reflect each country's experience, considering the different approach to collecting and processing SDG data. For some countries, many of these steps will be addressed concurrently or could perhaps take much longer than the estimated time period provided. This roadmap is based on the use of the national SDG indicator framework, focus on national priorities and the development plans. Many countries have used the global indicator framework as a starting point or incorporated it in some ways. So having one nationally agreed indicator and data framework for all national stakeholders to consult is essential to coordinate data provisions and the data assessment for national SDG progress monitors. So cooperation around the national framework can also help policymakers to exploit interlinkage among SDG to identify data reporting priorities. I would like to hand over to my colleague Heather to take you step by step on how to design a data roadmap for VNRs. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you so much, Yunyi. See if I can do this. Try that again. Okay. So on our step one for preparation and planning, Most roadmaps begin, of course, with an assessment of needs. And the first stage recommended in the data roadmap for ours is no different for preparation and planning, which aims to ensure sufficient time and resources are available to prepare the necessary data and develop the content utilizing an inclusive and participatory process. So in this stage, it is recommended that NSOs should have a key role in VNR preparation, given their overall importance for SDG monitoring. Essentially, NSOs can play a critical role in the consistency and accuracy of data used in VNRs, and they're best placed to build on the cooperative agreements for data supply. Governments have reported that that data prepared for VNRs was more likely to be quality checked if the NSOs were included in their multi-stakeholder forums. And as the VNRs have progressed, we are starting to see an even more influential role for the NSOs in part of the VNR preparation to help make them even more evidence-based. And before beginning any data inventories, VNR teams should include a data stage in which they assess existing data institutions and SDG processes. Governments should have in place an agreed institutional agenda for SDG follow-up and review, which benefits from including and designating a coordinating role for the NSOs to keep data at the forefront of that SDG reporting. And in addition, the 2030 Agenda recommends that existing reporting infrastructure should be used and built on for SDG monitoring and review. And existing national monitoring and evaluation systems, when available, should ideally be the foundation for integrating SDGs into national monitoring, follow-up, and review. And VNR teams have used processes set up to report on national development plans and policies, other international agreements, and/or regional SDG frameworks to track their SDG progress in the VNRs. And here I just have a quick example from Malawi on some of those additional existing reporting processes that can be key to providing data and information for the VNR. Excuse me. I'm getting over COVID. Here I just have an example of an institutional framework from Jordan. During their first VNR in 2017, their institutional framework included task forces as part of their M&E work. And these task forces also included statistical representatives, Department of Statistics representatives. And these task forces were considered very effective in reviewing the SDGs and data for the VNR. And based on the success of this, the government actually amended their governance frameworks to make the task forces permanent, aiming to strengthen the capacity to monitor and evaluate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. And the government noted that by ensuring NSO representation in these task forces, it contributed to activating the data ecosystem and providing accurate national data sources for the VNR. So moving on to step 2, and accurate and timely data reporting of the SDGs cannot happen without regular and formal cross-agency and multi-sectoral communication and data exchange. So a full data assessment stage will ensure that VNRs are informed by a wide array of data sources and that key data holding and in this stage, it is recommended that countries can utilize a consultation, similar here to the Republic of Moldova, where the model shows internal NSO data processes as well as other data producers as options for SDG statistics. And I just want to make a note here about the importance of engagement between the NSOs and policymakers during the VNR process. Policymakers are typically playing a lead role in the VNR reporting, and whilst statisticians are responsible for the SDG monitoring. And engagement among both can really help to ensure a more data-informed VNR, accurately reflecting not only national SDG progress, but also policy priorities. And lastly, this stage focuses on data mapping exercises to identify existing data sources for VNRs and to detect gaps in the national data collection. And gap analyses should include data inventories and could also review subnational data frameworks for incorporation into the VNR. And here I have an example from Iraq. You know, as Young-Yi mentioned, most VNR countries are presenting for subsequent times, or second, third, or fourth time, and they're encouraged to include information in the VNR on the progression of filling those data gaps for the SDGs. And here Iraq, in their 2021 VNR, included not only the increase in data availability, but also where that coverage is among the goals. And there, over the time period, they identified existing data gaps and tried to increase their analytical capabilities for producing data for SDG monitoring. And here I just have an example of a data visualization of the mapping of the data stakeholders for Somalia during their 2022 VNR. And this was is essentially a visualization of how they mapped their data stakeholders to really try to reduce fragmentation and improve the efficiency of their data production processes while they were working on their VNR. So next I want to move to our step 3 in data collection. Excuse me. The data collection process can start with traditional sources of data, followed by filling data gaps with the collection of data from non-traditional data sources, since the data reporting requirements for the SDG monitoring are substantial. And we would recommend that all data collection and processing mechanisms and procedures should be carried out in accordance with existing, updated, or new memorandums of understanding or other recognized agreements among the national statistical system, and in particular with other stakeholders. And apart from traditional data sources, such as population census, civil registration and vital statistics, administrative records where possible, and also household surveys, there is a surge in new data sources and data innovations. In particular, we've seen from COVID, and with an increase in digital technologies for data collection, with tablets, mobile phone, and even satellite-driven data collection. So alternative data, perhaps from geospatial information, sensors and social media, citizen-generated data, or small area estimations, or even analyses from nowcasts, can enhance the VNR reporting to compensate for gaps in official data. And we would caution here, of course, that non-traditional data should be carefully quality controlled to ensure that the official data reporting remains trustworthy. And here we have a link that could potentially be useful. I'll touch on new and emerging challenges in a second. And then lastly, on data analysis, it's important to note that the VNR is not just a snapshot in time, but really should look at the trend of progress or challenges in SDG implementation in the country, to really gauge how the country is progressing in its SDG goals. And in addition, additional data analyses are encouraged, looking at systems cross-cutting goals, and even further analyses for leaving no one behind. Governments are expected to also address new and emerging challenges in the VNRs, and many VNRs since 2020 have documented quite extensively on the impacts of the pandemic on national SDG progress and monitoring. And and in particular, the far-reaching impacts. But additional challenges could also be included, including food insecurity, conflict, migration, climate change, among others. And here I just have an example of what that has looked like in a recent VNR. Next, I have just a quick example that I wanted to highlight from Switzerland of an online tool that they used as their primary data collection process. They from their 2018 to their 2022 VNR, they streamlined their process from having a fragmented collection of documents to having an online tool that could bring together over 500 officers within the administration. And this tool also facilitated multi-stakeholder collaboration. And just wanted to kind of highlight how the digital tools and platforms can also be useful for different stages in the VNR process. And our last but not least, it's almost last, second to last step is data incorporation. And preparing the narrative of the VNR will stem from the results of the data analysis. And that data analysis will also follow the format of the VNR that's undertaken, whether it be by theme or by goal or topic. But in this step, we would actually kind of like to focus a bit on the narrative and some resources and things to consider for the incorporation of data in the VNR. Excuse me. The data analysis will provide, in essence, the what, but sometimes providing the information visually can help to engage audiences and help them to better grasp that data. This is where kind of data storytelling and data visualization can help to provide the why and the so what. And so UNSD has developed a few tools, our practical guide for data storytelling, to help science. And then we also have a data visualization toolkit, which includes icons that cover the SDGs and COVID-19 and are in formats that are for kind of high tech and low tech as well. And so these are just some resources that can be useful potentially for developing more of the the narrative on the data. And additional considerations for the VNR include progress charts or assessments, which we're seeing a bit more of these in the VNRs. We do have a range of methodologies that are explored in the guide, but obviously also countries have their own. And then stat annexes, which are increasingly provided in the VNRs to show the data behind the analyses. And then also the SDG data platforms, which provide an opportunity for users to explore more information and on the data, as well as can be useful tools for many many stages along the way in the data roadmap. And here I just have an example of one data platform, the Tree of Truth from Estonia, which is a digital yardstick on the country's important indicators, and it actually looks at quite a few of their development objectives apart from just the SDGs. And so last, for the data roadmap, we have the presentation and post-analysis section. And here we would just offer some final considerations for the report, potentially a data chapter or section kind of outlining what that data journey has been for the VNR, in particular because it's not always easy to find this information. The UK provided a chapter that was very informative, including the so what, kind of giving more of that narrative for the reasons behind the data and what it's showing, exploring the impact of policies, And then in the presentation, including those data stories, visualizations, and infographics. And then we would also encourage a post-analysis since the VNR preparation process can help NSOs and other VNR teams, member agencies understand the strengths and the weaknesses of the SDG monitoring, but also the national statistical system in general, and drawing up a list of sustainable data goals for VNRs can help them, the country kind of develop a framework for how they would like to strengthen the monitoring and also what capacity building opportunities could be pursued. And my last slide is just some additional considerations for deepening the data analysis in the VNR. In particular, as almost all countries have presented at least once, and this is an opportunity for kind of an update on their progress. As I had already mentioned, kind of the standalone data chapter, but also the inclusion, if possible, of a progress assessment or a progress chart. Does the country have an established methodology, or could one be developed, and could this be included in the VNR, as it provides a very nice snapshot of progress? Deepening the analysis, particular data analysis on intersecting vulnerabilities, looking at compounding deprivations, and really trying to ascertain who is being left behind. Analyses on how well SDG policies have worked or not, who is benefited, who is still behind, and then the interconnected or the cross-cutting of the SDGs. And then a look back at the data recommendations in that first VNR. How have they been addressed, and how much progress has been made, and what challenges still remain? So thank you so much. I'm going to pass back to Youngyi for the next slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So in the practical guide, we also have a chapter on data disaggregation and leaving no one behind. So many of you, due to the age, social, economic status, gender, ethnicity, geographic, and a vulnerable group tend to be excluded from access to good education, healthcare, electricity, safe water, and other critical services. So with the adoption of the 2030 agenda, member states pledge to leaving no one behind and reach the furthest behind first. So many countries has also including the leaving no one behind element or chapter in their voluntary national review. However, as many VNR point out, the lack of sound disaggregate data for many of these vulnerable population group, one of the main challenges when preparing the VNRs. Those who are the furthest behind are often uncounted. So existing statistics typically only capture the national, subnational, even like a city average. This average often masks disparities at community, household, or individual group levels. The challenge is that those who are the most vulnerable, the furthest left behind, are often uncounted. So government cannot ensure that everyone is included in the progress if they do not know they exist in the first place. The lack of sound disaggregate data for many of these vulnerable population group exacerbates their vulnerabilities by masking the extent of deprivation or disparities. So as a result of the planning and budgeting for necessary service, along with effective policy making, has suffered. There are many reasons why these vulnerable population groups are excluded or not counted. For instance, the incomplete coverage due to like a household service sample size or cost. It's harder to access to some of the vulnerable population group. A household service do not collect the data from the population live in institutions. And also survey mostly collects at the household level, and they risk ignoring the intra-household disparities. Many of the administrative data may cover only those enjoying the service and excluding the population group that do not have access to the service. Also, collection data on some of the characteristics may be legally precluded in some countries, such as religions and ethnicities. So try to deliver effective policy on leaving no one behind require a great investment in data to reduce existing data gaps and improve the production of disaggregate data. National statistical system need further investment and increase capacity. Next slide, please. So the VNR process can also be viewed as an opportunity to improve the collection and use of data on vulnerable population who may not have been considered in the past. In some countries, the VNR process has been instrumental in initiating collecting data associated with some vulnerable population groups. And the existing statistical process have been adopted to collect this type of data. For example, household survey is in Niger now collect data on persons with disabilities and also on refugees. National Statistical Office of the Gambia and Kenya have devised a questionnaire to collect disability status data based on the Washington Group questionnaires. So it's crucial that the National Statistical Office and other data producing agencies adapt their data collection and the data preparation methods to make the data more inclusive. So country can take a step-by-step approach to improve data inclusiveness for SDGs. I think based on the time, I may not go to these steps in detail, but the chapters in the guide provide you a lot of information on the steps and a good example from the countries. Here, a couple of country experience in the production of the disaggregated data, highlighting in the VNR. The first example is from the UK. They included a leaving no one behind example for Africa, along with a section called the data picture. The VNR described their activities to understand who is being left behind, where they produce the data through audits, and everybody counts project and other programs. So UK ONS is a champion of the inclusive data charter. And, how they make their data inclusive, not just by disaggregating data, but also how design your data collection and dissemination and make it more inclusive throughout the whole data value chains. And in Republic of Moldova, they included a disaggregated data production with a child-focused indicator to monitor the SDGs and the national policies. They also describe poverty mapping at the lowest possible subnational level. This is a few examples that countries included leaving no one behind focus in their voluntary national reviews. What's the next steps? So we have a few steps left for the practical guide. First, we are in the process of receiving initial feedback on the current advanced version, and we'll work to finalize the contents. We will also develop a guiding question for each step in the VNR data roadmap for countries to use when developing their VNRs. And in addition, we would like to include examples of countries' VNR data roadmaps that can be a tool for others. So we really welcome your feedbacks and examples. So if you have good examples and also other feedbacks, please send them to Heather. Thank you. Next slide. In addition, I would like to share some useful information for VNRs on our website. USD has worked with the SDG custodian agencies and the regional commission to develop a list of valuable, useful resources for VNRs. So here is an Excel file, has the main site and also include SDG custodian agency from the SDG custodian agency and regional commission on VNR resources, trainings, and indicator goal specific resources and training. So we encourage you to review these resources, especially for this additional support. We also include on the website of our previous workshops, meetings that the UNSD conducted related to how to help country prepare data-driven and evidence-based VNRs. So in this, each workshop, there's a rich information and from countries, agencies, and other stakeholders on how to help provide evidence-based VNRs. Next slide. Yes. In addition, we also have a lot of useful information for VNRs and SDG monitors. So on our website, we have this wiki site, gather good practices from national statistical offices and regional and international organizations, and in the following area on SDG data disaggregations, national SDG platforms, dashboards, SDG portals, and other progress assessment tools. We also have how to communication of SDGs, how to bridging data gaps of SDG indicator, and the use of non-traditional data sources or innovation data collection techniques. This is a good practice collected from countries and agencies. And we also have this website on data disaggregation for the SDG indicators. This website provides a series of tools and resources for country on data disaggregation, including the practical guidebook on data disaggregation for the SDG. This was developed by the Asian Development Bank and the USD with the IAG SDGs input. So we also encourage you to look into this practical guidebook for more information on data disaggregation. In addition, we want to share the USD FCDO project on SDG monitoring. So this project supported 20 countries in Africa, Asia, in strengthening their capacity in the compilation and the use of SDG indicators and making data and the indicator available to users, including decision and policymakers. This website brings together the materials developed with other resources used by the projects into a single space, including national SDG monitor arrangement, data modeling, SMX, metadata, data platform, user engagement, and data innovation, and to make them available to both project country and others who wish to develop their work on SDG monitors. And the last one I want to share is this Data for Now initiative of USD with partners. This aims to help countries' capacity to deliver the information needed by the local and the national policy decision making to achieve the 2030 agenda. And to this end, it supports members on the national statistical system in participating countries to collaborate more effectively with local, national, global partners from the intergovernmental organization, academia, and the civil society, and to leverage innovative data sources, technologies, and methods. Lastly, I guess I would like to just inform you about two other opportunities on VR-related data events. The first one is a virtual expert peer exchanges for the VNR 2023 country and focus on data disaggregation and use of non-traditional data sources. This is in order to foster learning for the 2023 VNR countries. It's joint organized by UNDESA, UN Foundation, and Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data and Data to X. This will take place on 2nd of February. This exchange will provide a space for the 2023 VNR country to learn from one another and to identify best practice in developing their VNRs. We will make this like a video and presentation available on the UNSD website. The second event is a side event on supporting evidence-based VNRs of the 54th session of the UN Statistical Commission. This event will take place on 14 February. It's open to all participants. It will invite countries to share their national experiences, good practice, and tools on how they have improved the data to support the VNR over the years. So more information will be available on the side event website of the Statistical Commission. We also share the detailed information in the global network. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and we'll open for any questions.
Thank you very much, Yongyi and Heather, for your very insightful presentation. And also it's very timely because a lot of countries are in the midst of doing their VNRs for this round. And it's also a delight for us to also see that in this meeting, there are quite a number of participants from either NSOs or resident coordinator offices in countries that are doing VNR. So hopefully this session is very useful to all of you. Just before we go to Q&A, I just want to mention that there are quite a lot of materials in the presentation, and people are asking for links and presentations and so on. We will do two things. After the event, we will post the then, as Yongyi mentioned, secondly, whenever there are any relevant VNR events that are open to the public, we will also share information through the announcement in the global network. So with that, let me open the floor for the first round of questions for Yongyi and Heather. Please use the raise hands function if you have any questions for our presenters. Perhaps as we wait for questions to come in, I want to ask you a couple of the questions that have been posted in the chat. There's a question from Taufik from the Resident Coordinator Office in Syria. And Taufik asked, the UN system has now launched the indicators framework to measure the contribution of the UN system to SDGs with great methodological notes. The question is, how will this be considered in the VNR process to ensure that all stakeholders in the country measure in a similar or consistent way with the framework? So over to you, Yongyi and Heather, on this question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for this question, this is a very important question and will be great. I mean, in the guidance, we mainly focus on the national effort. Maybe we also included this information and to highlight the importance of coordination of the UN country team working together with the national government in prepare the voluntary national review to ensure the collaborative effort and also coherent information. So yeah, thanks for the information.
Thank you. And I see a hand from Carmen. So Carmen, please turn on your camera and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, good morning. My name is Carmen Aida Gonzalez from the RCO office in Guatemala City. I have two questions, two short questions. The first one is, what recommendations do you have for countries which have, difficulties collecting data and more so after the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there is fragmentation of data, and this makes it difficult for them to follow up on the advance of the SDG. And the second question is about what methodologies would you recommend to fill the gaps, when you don't have all the information that ideally you will need to have. And also, are there any other countries or institutions that can give support, even financial, to those countries? Over to you, and thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much, Carmen, for your questions. For the first question, so I think we didn't mention in this presentation, but many countries have experienced a lot of challenges, in particular during the COVID-19 and on data collection, because there's a lot of data disruptions, and many countries postponed their census and the household surveys during this period of time. And so it's a very challenging time, but the National Statistics Office and the National Statistical System also try to create innovative approach and the technologies to overcome many of these challenges. For example, during the pandemic, they don't have the face-to-face survey, and they started the phone survey, internet survey, and other approaches, and use cross-sourcing a method and collaboration with other partners. So we identify all this good practice, and we try to share them and in the guide, and also through other resources that we included in the USDG. For example, the Data for Now project is aiming to use new data approach and technology tools to create more timely data. And so we will make this more public available for the country to use. As you mentioned, that yeah, many countries also facing the financial and human resource constraints. They really need financial and technical support in data collections. There's some initiative at the global level aiming to provide and increase the capacity building and the financial support to country. I think last year the DSG and the World Bank launched a new initiative on financial for data and request contribution, particular on data. I can't remember the exact amount, but this is a new initiative. And there's some other initiative for call for like increased support for data and technical support. We have been the US supported to countries as much as possible. I'll probably pass over to Heather to add more information.
Not to oversimplify things at all, but a lot of what we hear from countries in filling data gaps is also very much tied to collaboration and expanding their, essentially kind of expanding their data ecosystem to more than what they originally thought was available. The UK provided a very good example of the fact that they had a platform that they felt was very joined up. In essence, when they put out their baseline report, they started to actually find that they had data in places they didn't really necessarily know that they had. And so some countries will kind of, as a start, kind of take their baseline report and put it out to their broader data ecosystem to kind of see where they might be able to fill some of those gaps, and collaborate more potentially with other stakeholders that they might not have considered. Because yes, I mean, I think all countries are facing this difficulty, but there is one of the other things that we're hearing from countries is that the VNR actually provides an opportunity, surprisingly, I thought actually, to find data that, and that it was a really good opportunity for that. So just, you know, another point on that. And then as far as collaborating with countries and institutions, I have heard of countries kind of reaching out to other countries to try to get support. And so, I mean, obviously, you know, we can try to help bang on doors as well. I mean, where possible, of course, kind of giving that information out where we can. But I have some countries are doing kind of those partnerships, and especially actually in Asia, for SCAP, they have a twinning program where they are putting VNR countries that are presenting in the same year, that they'll work together and they exchange ideas, and it also is a way to kind of pool resources. So the twinning program that they have in SCAP is something also that countries maybe perhaps could pursue in their region, if not in a formal aspect, even in an informal one. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to add, like, within country, there's also a lot of initiative to incorporate non-traditional data sources, such as working with the civil society and organizations to gather data for vulnerable population groups, working with private sectors and also academias on some of the new data sources. So this is also a good opportunity to explore new data partnerships.
Thank you very much. Very useful information.
Thank you, Carmen, for your questions, and Yongyi and Heather for your answers. I think, Yongyi, the second part of your question also, of your answer also, was a response to one of the questions in the chat about how NSOs could seek support, financial or technical. So yeah, that's very useful information. Let me now give the floor to Gabriel. Gabriel, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation and the beautiful guide. I just wanted to mention, I put a comment here that is rather long, that actually I wanted to discuss with Heather and Yongyi earlier, but for the reasons that were mentioned before, I mean, it was not possible, but we can discuss that later, right? I mean, that's I believe it is in the guide, but maybe should be stressed. It's very important because we have to enhance the trust in the data and the evidence. That is actually the starting point to building up, I would say, the comments, the evaluation, and the reviews. But the other thing that I just wanted to mention here, and it's probably not, for us statisticians, and they are not only statisticians here, it's rather clear. But sometimes we go quickly from data. Are the data, or is the data available or not? Our job is not just to find the data, right? Sometimes they are not available. We need to collect them. Sometimes they're already there. But there is a huge work of processing the data. Right. So not that other people think that once we find the data, bingo, we have it. No, it's not enough. And that's why so many people are working for statistics, right? It's because once we have the information, we have checked, of course, the quality of the information, the accuracy, the availability, the accessibility. We collect it and then we process it. And we have to, of course, transform it according to different I would say structures that are requested by gender, by age, by disability status, and so on. And this is a huge work. I just wanted to mention that. And for people that want to understand a little bit better this process, there is a GSBPM, which is actually the generic statistical business process model that explain each of the steps. The model was developed by ECE actually. Collection of the data is in the middle of this process. So just for you to understand that. Thank you very much and congratulations again, Heather and Yongi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for the great comments. We totally agree. And this is, data collection is it's a small step among this whole data processing and ensure the data quality and processing, provide the right data and to users and policymakers. It's very important and critical.
Thank you. So we have just about a minute left. So maybe to make sure that we cover all grounds, let me ask a final question from the registration. And the question is quite simple. What is the role of custodian agencies in supporting the VNR process?
Heather, you want to take the question?
Sure. Custodian agencies have taken on quite a few, the development of quite a few resources and materials for countries developing their VNR. They've developed quite a few guidelines, as well as specific training on particular indicators, targets, and goals. And some custodian agencies also offer individualized support. So if countries are interested in a custodian agency assisting them in particular indicators, targets, and goals, we can reach out on your behalf if you like, or you can reach out to these to the custodian agencies for that support. We've tried to gather a lot of that in the Excel file that's on our website, but of course, some of that could be missed. But the custodian agencies really are quite eager to help countries, in particular for some of these indicators that the countries may be struggling with, that they do really want to try to monitor, that it's important for their national development as well as their policy priorities. And so custodian agencies can offer that support. I hope that answered your question. I'm sorry.
It does. It does. Well, I think, again, we're going to share that presentation with all the links, and, everybody is really encouraged to go and explore some of those additional resources for sure. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of this webinar. There are just quickly a couple of things to do before we end. First of all, we have a couple of quick questions to just try to see kind of your satisfaction with the webinar. I'm going to launch the survey and it's going to show up on your screen, and I'll leave it there for a couple of seconds so that everyone can tell us how we did. That's question number 1. And then there is also a second question on whether you have learned anything new from this section. This will help us improve in our future programming. The results will not be disclosed, so rest assured that your feedback is anonymous. And with that, the only thing remaining now is to thank our 2 presenters. I know that Heather, for example, is really unwell today, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us on this very important topic. If I could, let me ask that everyone in the session turn on your camera and unmute yourself and just give our 2 presenters a huge round of applause. Thank you, Heather and Yongyi.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity.
And we'll also try to answer some more of the questions as we can. Thank you so much.
So we'll continue the conversation on the global network, but for now, thank you for joining us for this first of our global network webinar for the new year, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.